Everyone thought Pfizer was leading the charge. But what if I told you they were never officially part of Operation Warp Speed? The government's $18 billion vaccine program and the biggest pharmaceutical name wasn't even on the list. Why? Was it a strategic decision, a legal loophole, or something much deeper, something they didn't want you to notice? In this video, we pull back the curtain on one of the most misunderstood pieces of pandemic history, and by the end, you might never look at Pfizer or Operation Warp Speed the same way again.
And it's this little-known court case that is still active, titled Kansas versus Pfizer, brought by Kansas Attorney General Chris Kobach. And ironically, would you believe it was announced on June 17th of 2024. And when you watch this little 3-minute video, I'd encourage everyone to really pay attention to this, and maybe clip this and save it. Barring any changes, I believe this is giving you, whether it's this case or not, which is still active, I believe what he describes here is going to give you a lot of the off-ramp that we've been questioning for how Trump is going to explain this to the public when we get to that point. So take a quick look, listen closely to what Attorney General Chris Kobach in the state of Kansas had to say on June 17th of 2024 when he announced his lawsuit against Pfizer. Listen closely.
Pfizer marketed its vaccine as safe for pregnant women. However, in February of 2021, Pfizer possessed reports for 458 pregnant women who received Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine during pregnancy. More than half of the pregnant women reported an adverse event, and more than 10% reported a miscarriage, many within days of the vaccination. Pfizer also possessed information from its own October 2020 study on pregnancy in rats, indicating that its COVID-19 vaccine was likely linked to infertility, loss of litters, and stillborn offspring. Number two, safety relating to heart conditions like myocarditis. Pfizer consistently denied any evidence of a connection or safety signal between its COVID-19 vaccine and myocarditis or pericarditis. Indeed, on January 18, 2023, when asked whether its vaccine caused strokes or myocarditis, Pfizer chairman and CEO Alan Berla stated, quote, "We've not seen a single signal, although we have distributed billions of doses," end quote. A signal that he was referring to as a safety signal, which refers to a negative consequence. However, as Pfizer knew, the United States government, the United States military, foreign governments, and others had found that Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine caused myocarditis and pericarditis. Number three, effectiveness regarding variants. Pfizer also claimed that its COVID-19 vaccine protected against COVID-19 variants, even though data available at the time showed Pfizer's vaccine was effective less than half the time against variants. Finally, transmission. Pfizer urged Americans to get vaccinated in order to protect their loved ones, clearly indicating a claim that Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccination stopped transmission of COVID-19. Pfizer later admitted that it had never even studied transmission of it after its recipients received the vaccine and whether they could say it stopped transmission. After making these misleading statements, Pfizer also engaged in some censorship attempts. Emails reveal that Pfizer officials coordinated with social media platforms to censor any speech critical of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine safety and effectiveness. It should also be noted that Pfizer elected not to join the federal government's vaccine development program known as Operation Warp Speed and declined that development funding. When asked about that, Pfizer's CEO, Albert Bourla, said Pfizer did not participate in the program in order to, quote, liberate, end quote, Pfizer's scientists and to avoid government oversight of its vaccine development. He also said, quote, "They want reports. I don't want to have any of that," end quote. Referring to they, when he said they, he was referring to the federal government. Pfizer's misleading statements contributed to success in marketing its vaccine in Kansas. By February of 2024, Pfizer had delivered over 3.3 million doses of its vaccine in the state of Kansas. This accounted for over 60% of all vaccine doses given in the state of Kansas. This suit is being filed today And as I mentioned before, it is part of a multi-state effort in which more suits may follow depending on Pfizer's reaction.
Very interesting.
Dasting.
Dasting indeed. Marketed it.
The key things there. Obviously, he's got them dead to right on the lies in their clinical trials, which we all know. But the key thing there, the major takeaway that I see, is that they openly admitted they did not take funding or participate in Operation Warp Speed, and they did not report back to Trump's government.
Mm-hmm.
That, to me, and also pay attention to the end. This is not just Kansas. This is a multi-state lawsuit. And one other little interesting nugget, and then Patriot, I want to get your reaction. There is this little Q drop right here. 1122. Trust Sessions, trust Ray, trust Kansas, trust Horowitz, and trust Huber. Now, it's interesting because on the right side, there's another one that talks about trust Kansas, where it points to Pompeo. This is an anon talking about Pompeo. But if you notice this drop, it's using names. It doesn't say trust Pompeo. It says trust Kansas. Well, who brought that lawsuit? The state of Kansas. Very fascinating.
Very fascinating. Yeah, that was exactly what jumped out at me. At first, I was listening and I was like, okay, yeah. So they marketed it as safe. They obviously lied. They obviously hid the connections to myocarditis and to miscarriages and all types of problems. It's like we kind of knew that, but I didn't know that was new to me. The whole part about them not participating in Operation Warp Speed. I had no idea. So that and not only that, I think he said that because they didn't want any kind of government oversight. Right. So how that plays into, like you said, I think it's a great term you use, by the way, the off ramp for Trump. That could very, very well be the, I guess, the wiggle room that he has to say, well, wait a second, we had this whole Operation Warp Speed. We had the military in control of Operation Warp Speed, and they were the ones who were basically Mike actually just did a big article on this. We talked about it last Monday. Once again, revisiting COVID and the military's control over Operation Warp Speed. But if Pfizer was somehow not a part of that, and they didn't want any of that government oversight and so on and so forth, and it turned out that their version of the jab was what was causing all of these cancers and all of these problems and all of these heart issues. That seems to those puzzle pieces seem to fit, where Trump could say, "Listen, we had Operation Warp Speed. We had the military under control and so forth of all of this, the dispensation of the jab and the manufacturing of it and so on, but they didn't participate." I guess maybe the only question I would then, kind of wonder would be, well, if they weren't participating in Operation Warp Speed, how were they then allowed to still distribute this vaccine? And I'm not sure how that would go. I'm not sure if you guys have any thoughts on that, because I think a lot of people would maybe ask that question, like, well, as the truth comes out about COVID and as the truth comes out about the jab and Operation Warp Speed and so on, wouldn't they probably ask that question and say, well, wait a second, how are they then allowed to distribute if they weren't a part of Operation Warp Speed? And I'm not sure. I'm kind of like thinking out loud here.
That's a great question. I mean, would you be surprised, given everything we're finding? I wouldn't be surprised if there was another narrative deployed that said something to the effect of there was deception in that. And there was deception in that what Kansas found out somehow didn't make it up to the federal government, and they thought it was being.
Maybe they thought that they were actually involved, but they weren't.
Who knows? Yeah, who knows?
Yeah.
The more steps of deception they put in, the further and further away from it Trump is pushed, which is exactly what needs to be done to get him out of this.
Yeah,
it's a very good question, dude.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about it and just thinking, well, I guess with the understanding that like Trump would have known that they weren't a part of it, but what if he didn't? What if he was under the impression that they were, and all of these shenanigans were going on behind the scenes?
Yeah, that exonerates Trump and further sells the narrative of how corrupt the government is, which is what we're seeing right now. I don't know, but it's a good question. But that it wouldn't shock me if that's how it went, given the way they're, the goals we're trying to achieve of at every step of the operation, trying to show more and more deception and corruption and frankly treason and genocide amongst the government. That would serve that purpose if there was another piece that came out to address exactly what your question is. But that's a really good question.